Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. In this video, we are going to talk about a slightly different topic, should I say. We're going to talk about a study that I came across recently online that focused on the topic of wealth inequality, which is pretty much on everyone's minds at these days, and in light of all the recent increases in the cost of living. This study was conducted in 2020 by the National Bureau of Economic Research in Cambridge, Massachusetts, in the United States. And some of its findings really caught my attention because they are quite different from what I usually hear from media sources, people, and from people in general. I think those results, those findings were quite interesting, and I wanted to share these with you because I think it never hurts for each and every one of us to know a little bit more about the underlinings of this important topic these days, which affects so many people in general, and also it creates such heated discussions across media sources and everything. And so I will put the link down below in the description for you to have a look. And then yeah, basically that's it. Let's go for it. So as you can imagine, and as we all know, there has been growing inequality in developed countries, in most of the world, and we have seen that wealth has been transferred down to future generations, and this is especially evident in the generations that came after the one that we all know as the baby boomers, which is the post Second World War cohort that was born between, I believe, 1946 and 1964, and today it is widely recognized as being the wealthiest of all generations. However, despite, of course, what we all know about wealth inequality, we must understand that there are a few caveats when it comes to assessing wealth inequality that can potentially question its validity. And just to give you a very brief example, if we have two individuals with equal levels of wealth, all right, they can have equal levels of wealth, but for example, they can have very different sources of wealth. For example, one individual can attain its wealth through working over several years during his career, while another one can potentially never have worked his entire life, then receives an inheritance from his parents or other members of his family, and because of that, they can have the same wealth, but the incomes and the sources of income can be, and the sources of wealth rather, can be very, very different. And on the flip side of that, individuals with equal incomes can have very different levels of wealth. For example, if one of these two individuals have a much higher propensity to consume and not so much to invest, this person would be expected to have a lower level of wealth relative to an individual who has a lower propensity to consumption and invests most of its income. So in this case, the wealth inequality would be considered to be quite high over a longer span of time, but they have equal incomes. And so the topic of wealth inequality as these tight spots in which it's difficult to address the differences, that the sources of these differences, and many of those can be somewhat deemed fair, and other ones can be deemed a little bit unfair. So even if there is a such thing in this world as fair or unfair. So, but nonetheless, the study focused on the most important determinants of the differences in wealth across individuals, and to do so, it uses a 20-year sample data set on the population of Norway, which is a Scandinavian European country, And so this sample comprises of individuals which are aged between 26 years old and 46 years old at the start of the sample period, and both of their net wealth at the start of the study and their incomes at the start of the study are tracked over time. All right. And so using this data, the researchers created two variables. One is the potential wealth, which is the starting net wealth that they have, plus all the income received from all sources over the period, over this 20-year period. And the other variable is the deep potential wealth, which is basically the starting net wealth plus the capitalized sum of all sources of income, government transfers, gifts, inheritance received from all sources over the period. So basically, the thing is, the potential wealth is the difference between the two is that the deep potential wealth capitalizes all sources of income while the potential wealth does not. So, and this is an important aspect to be understood, because as you can imagine, wealth compounds over time. You see, if you have a positive net wealth and you invest, you end up having a much higher level of wealth later down the road than if you just keep saving your income or your sources of wealth and do not invest in order to get a return. And so this aspect is also relevant in this analysis. And so this allows the assessment of importance of each source of wealth over time. All right. And so the sources of income that were considered for this study were, first and foremost, the net labor income, all right, which is basically all the labor income that we receive, less the taxes and the deductions, for example, the contributions to social security and all that. Other source of income is the government transfers, meaning the income received through the government, pensions, subsidies, unemployment subsidies, unemployment benefits, should I say, less the taxes. Also, the net capital income, it's another source of income, meaning the interest from deposits, fixed income, mutual funds, dividends, property rents. They also consider in this particular variable, in this particular source of income, the inputted rental income from home ownership. What does this mean? Is that by owning a home, you are basically saving up a potential rent payment. All right, and because the repayment of the house, assuming you had a loan from the bank to buy your house, all right, you are paying back the mortgage, all right, but you are building equity on your house, and in that sense, it contributes to your wealth, because a progressively greater share of the home value will be yours. You will be the owner, and so this component also accounts for this particular source of wealth. Also, the tax deductions on interest paid, and it deducts the taxes paid on all of these inflows that I just explained. Another variable, which is one of the most should I say the most relevant ones in this study, at least the one that caught my attention the most, is the net inheritances and gifts received. All right, and basically this variable is the inheritances and gifts received less the taxes. All right. This also goes as far as including the lottery gains. All right, which basically are not subject to taxation. So the value is just a value of the lottery gain. That's it. And another variable is the capital gains on the real assets. In case of individuals, real assets is your house. All right. With basically the appreciation that it has in value over time. It also, in the case of Norway, it's not subject of taxation if you sell. If you sell your primary home and if your secondary home is held for more than 5 years, you do not pay taxes on the capital gains. And the last source of income considered is the capital gains on financial assets. All right, and basically what this means is that what this source of income considers is the asset appreciation over time less the capital gains taxes applicable. All right, and on the other hand, the outflows that are considered in order to reach the levels of wealth at the end of this period, the outflows considered are simply the wealth tax, which is paid in Norway, and the consumption. Basically, that's it. All right. And this study has several findings, which I think are very, very insightful. And this is what I really wanted to share with you. So the first finding is that I will say this slowly so that you can grasp really the meaning. So for both the poorest and the richest or wealthiest individuals, their actual wealth is more correlated with their potential wealth than for the people with more average actual wealth. What does this mean? It means that their actual wealth, the wealth they have, is much more similar. It is much closer to the wealth that they could potentially achieve. All right, if you account for all the income that he received plus the consumption, less the consumption and the taxes and all that. So what does this mean is that for the poorest and the richest, their potential wealth is more likely to result in their actual wealth. So let's just say they fulfilled the expected. The actual wealth is the result. Is the expected wealth they were expected to have at the start of the study. This is why this happens, because for the richest individuals, the impact of spending and consumption on their wealth is very limited. So what this happens is that, assuming all the wealth that they receive, all right, over the span of the 20 years, all right, because the amount of consumption and the amount of the impact of the taxes that they pay is relatively smaller, is quite small relative to the amount of wealth that they have. The potential wealth that they could get is very similar to the actual wealth that they actually have. All right, and this is also the same for the poorest individuals, the ones at the bottom of the wealth of the wealth distribution. Why? Because their low incomes leads them to have very low levels of consumption. You see, and so because they cannot consume a lot, the potential wealth that they can get, because their incomes are low, are also a very good predictor for the actual level of wealth that they have. By contrast, if we look at the levels of the wealth distribution, the individuals which have average levels of wealth, this is not the same. This does not happen. And why is that? Because these people tend to earn enough income to have larger differences in consumption patterns, you see? And so these people can either have a pattern of consumption which has a very, very significant effect on their wealth, all right? Because if they consume a lot, they will, if they have a very high propensity to consume, they will spend away most of their wealth. And if they are a little bit, if they have a low propensity to consume, they will save most of their wealth. And so this will lead to big, big differences across these individuals with average wealth. All right. So this is the difference. And so that's why the correlation between the potential wealth and the actual wealth that they have is lower for individuals of average income, should I say. And so another topic, and this is important in terms of each component of wealth, all right? We are going to address each and every one of those that I explained previously. The labor income, the income that comes from our jobs, from our work, is the most important source of wealth of almost all individuals. All right. And so the wealth inequality that exists, for the most part, is due to the differences in terms of labor income. All right. And this is a very, very special finding, because you would say that I don't think this is not an obvious finding for most people, the source of wealth inequality being the differences in labor income. All right. And this is the most explanatory source of wealth that explains most of the inequality for most individuals, except for the wealthiest 1% of individuals. And why is this? Because for this particular set of individuals, most of their wealth comes from capital gains on financial assets. And so the labor income for these people is a much, much smaller portion of their actual wealth. All right. And so because of that, because most of their wealth comes from capital gains on financial assets, the labor income does not determine much of their actual wealth. All right. And so net capital gains on real assets in terms of housing is also a relatively large component of wealth, especially for the poorest people, because for them the home is their biggest and most valuable asset. And so in terms of real assets, this is also somewhat a predictor for the wealth, but on a much lower capacity. All right. So this is just a small detail, because it really depends from whether you are at the top of the wealth distribution or you are at the bottom. If you are at the bottom, it explains a lot of your wealth, but if you are on the top, it does not explain as much. And so, in terms of net capital income, as I said, the income from dividends, from fixed income interest, deposits, property rents, this income, the net capital income, has also explains some of the wealth inequality, but on a much lower degree than the labor income. And this is also one of the conclusions that probably at least myself, I was not expecting. I would say that labor income has much lower importance, but in fact, it is not. And net capital income also explains some of the wealth inequality, but at a much lower degree relative to the labor income. And so, once again, the wealthiest 1% of individuals are the exception here, because as I said, capital income and capital gains from financial assets are their most important source of wealth. And so the capacity for net capital income to explain their source of wealth is higher for the wealthiest 1% than for the remaining individuals. And so, moving on, for example, the government transfers are also a relevant source of wealth, but only for the poorest individuals, as expected. And on the contrary, by contrast of the other variables that I explained, government transfers have the potential to shrink the span of wealth that exists. So it reduces wealth inequality, which is also an unexpected outcome of government transfers. Now, the biggest finding for me is that inheritances and gifts are not a relevant source of wealth for all individuals, even for the wealthiest ones. All right. And this is the big finding of the study, which I found super interesting. So, because of course, many of us tend to think that some people are very wealthy simply because they received a large inheritance or a large gift from a parent or a family member. In fact, this is not the case. They are not wealthy because of these inheritances of gifts. So this means that the rank of individuals from richest to poorest is not changed regardless of whether inheritances or gifts are considered. All right, they are irrelevant for the most part. Not only that, but if all individuals would receive, let's just say, an average value of inheritance, the level of wealth inequality, if we measure by the Gini coefficient, for example, would remain unchanged. All right. So, and this is a very important finding because it's almost meaningless. The role of inheritances and gifts in explaining wealth inequality. Now, why is this? Even though inheritances are significantly larger for the wealthiest 1% of individuals, the majority of its wealth, as I said, comes from capital income and capital gains, and also to a much lower extent to labor income. So, even though inheritances are a very small portion of wealth for all individuals, we must keep in mind that the heirs of the wealthiest individuals tend to be quite, or at least are much more likely to be wealthy than the heirs of other individuals. And why is this? I think this is a logical conclusion, but why is this? Primarily because they are, for the most part, they are already wealthy by the time they reach middle age, which is when they receive inheritances for most of the time. And so by the time they receive the inheritances, they no longer the inheritances that they receive tend to be a much lower portion of the actual wealth. So it doesn't change their lives. All right, it doesn't change their status as wealthy people or less wealthy. It doesn't change. Another reason is that because they invest their inheritances, for the most part, the wealthiest individuals invest their inheritances in financial assets, what happens is that at the end of the period, the value of the inheritances tend to be diluted over time because by investing in financial assets, they will get financial income from these assets. And so the effect of the inheritance tend to be diluted over time. As a value, the inheritance value tends to be smaller and smaller over time. And that is why this finding exists, and it's a relevant one. So nonetheless, there is evidence, of course, that supports this theory of intergenerational wealth, because the heirs of wealthy individuals tend to be wealthier than the heirs of other individuals. All right. So there is some support to this theory, but this does not occur due to the impact of inheritances. It can be because they have better education, more career opportunities because of the contacts that they have and all that, but it's not because the inheritances themselves. All right, and this is an important factor to keep in mind. And we will address this particular issue later down the road at the end of the video. So, and finally, the final aspect, that the final source of wealth that we mentioned earlier, the net capital gains on financial assets, in terms of source of income, in terms of source of wealth, is only relevant for the wealthiest 100% of individuals, as I said before, because for the remaining ones, this source of wealth is basically non-material. And so, as you can imagine, this source of wealth contributes to increase the wealth inequality. And so this is also a quite obvious but important aspect to keep in mind. So as a result of these findings, I think there are several takeaways to consider in terms of government policies. We all know that many politicians say that, one way to reduce the wealth inequality is to tax further the richest individuals, to put in place inheritance taxes and all that. So according to this study, one takeaway that we can draw from this is that inheritance taxes are not effective to reduce wealth inequality. All right, because basically it has limited influence on the individual's wealth. Inheritance do not play a role in individuals' wealth. Personally, and this is only my opinion, this is not part of the study, this only bounds me to this opinion. Another reason for the lack of effectiveness in inheritance taxes is because the wealthiest people, the wealthiest individuals, have options available to them to pass on their wealth to their heirs without paying taxes. For example, if you live in the US, you can, for example, set up an irrevocable trust. You can set up a foundation, for example. Foundations can also be used in other jurisdictions, but I'm just giving the example of the US because the US is the most well-known jurisdiction in which this can be done. So, irrevocable trusts, foundations can be set up, and in the case of trusts, you can use a trust. You can use a contract, make a contract, and a trustee will hold the assets of the trust and will manage the assets of the trust. And the underlying contract of the trust can dictate that your heirs can receive a monthly allowance for the rest of their lives, and this trust, by allocating the money to the trust, the wealthy individual will not pay taxes because it grants the ownership. It's like a donation to a trust, but in fact, because the ultimate beneficiaries of the trust are the heirs, effectively you are passing your wealth to the heirs without paying taxes, because setting up irrevocable trusts and the underlying donation to the trust is tax-free. And so basically, this is one of the ways that wealthy individuals can pass wealth to their heirs. It's an expensive arrangement, and so that's why only the wealthiest individuals have enough wealth to be worth it to pay all these costs in terms of the trustee, to arrange a trustee to manage the assets, setting up all the contractual clauses and all that. So this is something that it's only worthwhile for the richest individuals, not for the other ones. Another key conclusion is that since labor income is the most significant source of wealth, I think that if politicians and people in power want to reduce wealth inequality, probably the better way to do it is to setting up policies and putting in place policies that provide equal access to better education opportunities to all individuals, regardless of their wealth, or in this case, the wealth of their parents, ever since their childhood. And by doing this and providing all children to equal access to education opportunities and good quality education, the resulting enhancement in terms of human capital, and we all know that human capital is a key determinant of labor income, this should ensure that everyone can then access better paying jobs later in their lives. And this, as we saw, will in turn play a very significant role in reducing wealth inequality. I think this is probably the way to go in terms of policy, in terms of government policy, instead of all the catchy policies in terms of putting taxes into place. It doesn't work. This is probably the best way to do it. Thinking about it, I fully agree with it. And so I think there is no reason to use sort of eye-catchy policies and all that will turn a blind eye to the real problems that come from wealth inequality. Just this is the end of the study. Just to keep you in perspective on this, The researchers believe that these findings, using data from the Norwegian population, are also applicable to other developed other developed European nations and other developed non-European nations. And this is because the researchers took several measures at the time of this study, which underlie this assumption that they had. Just to give an example, the Norway and the Euro area, the Eurozone, have similar Gini coefficients for wealth inequality, and so this also gives a perspective that wealth inequality is similar between both regions, and so these measures and these findings should be verified in any of these locations, not only in Norway but in all of countries of the Euro area. In addition to that, in Norway and in the Euro area, the share of wealth held by the 10% wealthiest individuals spans between 40 and 50%, all right, respectively, between around 50% in Norway and around 42% in the Eurozone. So you'll see that the share of wealth in Norway is even larger than in the Euro area. And so because of that, the results from this study and the findings from this study should be, and the policies that should be put in place would probably have an even greater effect in the Euro area and in other countries for that matter. Also, the Norway has a ratio of private wealth to household income of which is kind of similar to other European nations across the board, not only the Scandinavians, also the US, and also, for example, the most notable example is Germany, which is the biggest economy in the Eurozone. And so, as you can imagine, by having a similar ratio of private wealth to household income, what this means is that the role of household income in determine the private wealth that an individual has is similar. So the influence of income to the wealth that the person has, it has a similar impact. And finally, in terms of income distribution, Norway has a particularly low Gini coefficient, all right? But in terms of income distribution, not wealth, income distribution, which also indicates that there is a low, let's just say, by having a low income, a low Gini coefficient, and so there is not much discrepancy in terms of income. What this means is that there is over a span of 10, 20, 30 years, this will also lead to lower wealth inequality. And so by having this situation, by having a lower income inequality, this is also similar to other countries, especially in Central Europe. And so this tells that wealth inequality is a topic that in some countries may not be that much of an issue, all right, because the income distribution itself is not that significant, but on the other hand is applicable, and the same sort of arrangement in terms of setting up policies that reduce wealth and income inequality can also be transferred to other countries in order to have those similar outcomes. So basically, I think this is a very, very insightful study. I would truly recommend for you to have a look. And now, just to wrap it up, I would say that we all know about the Dave Ramsey personality, and he advocates that our income is the biggest source of wealth. And most of the millionaires that he interviewed and he worked with to write his books, most of their source of wealth was attained through investment in 401ks, which is, of course, the retirement accounts in the US, and not by inheritance and all that. So this tells me that, all right, uh, you can agree or disagree with a person with some of his philosophies. It's not what matters here, but at least this gives some ground to his claims. And so I found that quite interesting. That yeah, basically it comes full circle when it comes to his own convictions, and apparently they have some ground into it. So, but of course. Please feel free to have a look at the study. I'm sure if you are interested in this topic, you will enjoy going through it as much as I did. And basically, that's it. Thank you so much for your attention. Feel free to subscribe, to give this video a like. Feel free also to get in touch on LinkedIn and send me a message in there in case you have any questions. And thank you so much. And have a great day. Thank you.